Hi, everyone. This is Chapter 10 Cognitive Behavior Therapy for Counseling 4500. All right, so the therapist that we will be focusing on in this chapter will be Albert Ellis, who is known for Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, or REBT. There's also Aaron Beck, Cognitive Therapy, Judith Beck, Cognitive Therapy, and then Donald Meichenbaum, which is Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. Typically, we will hear people talk about CBT in general as a term, and then they will acknowledge all these types of genres when it comes to these psychologists. Okay. All right. Introduction. Cognitive and behavioral principles and method in short-term treatment approach has generated the most empirical research compared to other psychotherapies. So we talked a little bit about this with behavioral therapy, where we're seeing that empirical data, or empirical research, which is observable research that people can see the differences in the changes, are starting to be very, very popular now. Okay. All right. Shares the following attributes to behavior therapy. Number one, it's a collaborative relationship between the client and the therapist. Two, the premise that psychological distress is largely a function of disturbances in cognitive processes. So, what that is saying is the reason why you're not feeling great or you're seeking out help is because of a disturbance in your cognitive process. Three, a focus on changing cognitions to produce desired changes in affect and behavior. And we saw a little bit of that when we talk about the ABC model, right? Four is a present-centered, time-limited focus. So we're focusing on the here and now. We also want to make sure that this therapy is not necessarily long, like years and years and years, like let's say Freudian or other ones. Instead, this one is like, what's the problem? What's the behavior that we want to focus on? And how can we do this, and get you out of therapy? All right, it's also an active and directive stance by the therapist. So you'll see a lot more modeling, directing, educating, and stuff like that. And then six, an educational treatment focus on specific structured target problems. Okay, it is a psychoeducational model. The role of homework is really important, and homework is when what you and your client decide that they need to do when they're not in therapy. So typically, let's say if therapy is once every week, there's a couple of days that they should probably focus and do something, so that it's not like they're just saving all of their changes and their behaviors in therapy with you, but they should actually be focusing and working on it on their own. Client to assume active role during the outside therapy sessions. Again, that ties up to the role of homework. And of course, building that alliance that they have. All right, the bottom line when it comes to this therapy is based on the assumption that that a reorganization of one's self-statements will result in a corresponding reorganization of one's behaviors. So let's see the two main parts here. A reorganization of one's self-statements. So how do you see the world? How do you say those things, or how do you tell yourself, or what you tell yourself is going to correspond with what you're actually going to do change-wise. All right, so let's first talk about Albert Ellis's rational emotive behavior therapy. First of the CBTs, it's major cognitive behavioral approach. So the assumption here is that people contribute to their own psychological problems, as well as to specific symptoms, by the rigid and extreme beliefs that they hold about these events and situation. So we are the reasons why we behave the way that we behave because of how we think or see or feel about something. Okay. Second assumption is cognitions, behaviors, emotions interact significantly and have a reciprocal cause and effect relationship. So how you think, how you actually, what your actions are, how you're feeling, right? All that stuff will bounce back with each other. Okay. It goes back and forth. It's not just one way. You feed off of each of those things. The hypothesis here is that our emotions stem mainly from our beliefs, which influence the evaluations and interpretations we make of the reactions that we have to a life situation. So let me read that again. Our emotions stem mainly from our beliefs, which influence the evaluation and interpretation we make of those reactions that we have to life situations. So again, how we see the world is how we're going to react or behave in that way. So if we think of the world as a positive way, we'll probably act a little bit more healthy. But if we think it's negative, or we were told, how to do certain things or believe in certain things by our, let's say, our families or our community, then we believe that that's true, right? But it might not necessarily be healthy. All right, therapy gives them the tools to identify and dispute irrational beliefs that have been acquired and self constructed. So, rational beliefs is the main term here in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is basically it's things that don't necessarily make sense or are healthy for you. Okay, but we have internalized those things because we were taught those things or told those things, and then we believe it, right? And so now we're going to address those irrational beliefs in this chapter. Learn how to replace ineffective ways of thinking with effective and rational cognition, and change your emotional reactions to the situation. All right, here are some of the key concepts of human nature. Humans are born with the potential for both rational, also known as straight in this terms or in this topic, and irrational, which is known as crooked thinking. Okay, so that means that we are able to tell what is correct thinking and unhealthy thinking, let's say. And then, but sometimes, we don't know which one it is, but we do have the ability to understand those things. Geared towards self-preservation, which means that, you want to make sure that you keep yourself alive. Happiness, thinking and verbalizing, loving, communion with others, growth, and self-actualization. So you can see sort of here, they're talking about very similar to what person-centered, right, was talking about, is that we are geared towards doing those things, right? But also geared to self-destruction, avoidance of thinking, procrastination, endless repetitions of mistakes, superstition, intolerance, perfectionism, self-blame, and avoiding of actualizing growth potentials. So even though we have the ability to be great and good and happy and all those things, sometimes we exist in an unhealthy way, right? And this is the reason why we're coming to therapy, or they're coming to therapy. All right, REBT encourages people to accept themselves even though they will make mistakes. Yeah, that sounds pretty obvious, right? All right, when it comes to the view of emotional disturbance, we learn irrational beliefs from significant others during our childhood and then recreate them throughout our lives. So again, we sometimes see how we, let's say our parents treat each other, and then we think, oh yeah, this is how a relationship should work. And let's say, for example, your parents were not necessarily the best or healthiest or happiest when it comes to being a couple, but because that's how you saw it, or that's what you saw, you thought that that was right, until we start to examine it and see other people's, compare, talk, and evaluate what's going on. We might not necessarily know that what we're doing is actually unhealthy, and then that's making you unhappy. We do not need to be loved and accepted even though it is desirable. Teaches clients how to feel sad but not depressed, and blame is at the core of most emotional disturbances. Okay, so it's trying to normalize it, make sure that you realize, this happens, but there's also still a sign of hope at the end of this road. All right, the three basic musts believe or irrational beliefs. So these are things that we might have been taught when we were younger, either by our family or our community. Number 1, I must do well and win the approval of others for my performances, or else I am no good. 2, other people must treat me considerately, fairly, kindly, and in exactly the way I want them to treat me. If they don't, they're no good and they deserve to be condemned and punished. And then third one is, I must get what I want when I want it, and I must not get what I don't want. If I don't get what I want, it's terrible. I can't stand it, and life is no good for depriving me of what I must have. Right? So these are very a little scary, right? If you think about it, because life is not like this. It's not just one way. And this is why when we believe in these irrational beliefs and it doesn't go our way, because the world is not like this, you're not always going to get everything that you want, right? Then you don't understand necessarily how to cope. And that's something that we're going to work on in therapy, right? So these are things that sometimes we are raised with. Maybe you have other things that you were raised with to believe in, but just think about those things and then see how, it has changed as you become an adult and you're exploring the world and you realize it's not how it was when you imagined it when you were a child. All right, so we talked a little bit about the ABC framework before, but we're going to add a couple of things to it in CBT. So A is the activating event, B is the belief, so it could be a rational or irrational belief, and then C is the emotional behavior or consequence that happens. So A is the activating event, so what happened, right? And then B is, well, how do you feel about that specific thing that was happening? And depending on if it's a healthy way of seeing the world or an unhealthy way of seeing the world, you can be either happy or sad as a consequence, right? So A, the activating event, does not really cause how you feel. It's really the B, which is the person's belief about A, that creates C. Okay, here's an example, divorce. So A does not cause depression, or divorce does not cause depression, right? Depression is the C. Because, hey, what if you were the one that was being cheated on, right? So you do need to want to get a divorce. So that should make you happier, hopefully, right? Because you don't want no, fool or whatever, right? As your partner, as your husband or wife or partner or whatever it is. No. So we need to think about how it actually can be good. So it says that it is how the person feels about the divorce that leads to the depression. If B is seen as a failure, so if you saw divorce as an embarrassment, right? Yeah, then that will lead to depression, not acting like you want to sign the divorce papers. However, if he's a no good fool or whatever, she's no good fool, it's probably good that you don't waste the rest of your life living a lie, right, with this partner. So let's go over to the next slide and then continue this now. D is disputing intervention. So this is what we're doing when we come into therapy. Application of methods to help the client challenge their irrational beliefs. So you need to detect it first, you need to talk about it or debate about it, and then you need to learn how to tell the difference between a healthy and unhealthy, which is discriminating against, right? So detecting is the irrational beliefs, which is the sounds and musts in life, so you need to realize that this is happening. Debating is their dysfunctional beliefs by learning how to logically and empirically question them and to vigorously argue themselves out of and act against those beliefs in them. So remember, debating is to talk about how, oh yeah, this is not good for me for these specific reasons. And discriminating, again, is to make sure that you can tell the difference between a good or healthy belief versus an unhealthy belief. This process is also known as cognitive restricting. E is effective philosophy. So that means that we're going to choose and be aware of a healthier way of living. Okay, then F is the new set of feelings, feeling sorry and disappointed in according with the situation. But if it doesn't need that, then you don't have to, right? So as just a quick review is, so before we might have acted a certain way because of how we believe of how we see the world, right? ABC. And then we're realizing, you know what? If you're unhappy, let's figure out why, right? Maybe it's because of the way that you were raised. So now we need to learn what is a healthy belief and what is an unhealthy belief, or irrational and rational belief. And then from there, now we need to set our lives in a way where we don't necessarily fall back into those old habits again, because it's just going to make us unhappy, right? And then from there, we're going to hopefully feel better. Therapeutic process and therapeutic goals. We have a strong tendency to consider ourselves as either good or bad, worthy or unworthy. Rate ourselves as a total person on the basis of our performances. The goal is to teach clients how to separate the evaluation of their behaviors from the evaluation of themselves, so the essence and the totality, and to accept the self in spite of the imperfections. Like we have said before, right? We are born making mistakes. Okay, we'll always make mistakes, and it's okay, but we need to realize that. And we also need to realize that if there is a mistake that we make, we should correct it and then move along. Okay, because if not, then we might get stuck in one specific place, and then we don't end up living our lives. Okay, so again, we need to admit to all of us that we are not perfect beings and that we will make mistakes, and it's okay. So here are some questions I would ask in class, which is, what kind of experience will the client have? The client accepts that the belief underpins their emotions and behaviors, learn how to apply logical thought, role-playing, and then homework. Okay, so that's the experience. Does our EBT focus on early childhood? Not necessarily. We really want to focus on what's going on right now. Okay, so remember, this is a quick therapeutic framework. We're not going to go and try to analyze all that stuff because they believe that the things that have happened in your past have already happened, right? So how do we deal with it today so that you can move on with your life? The third one is, does REBT explore family and sibling relationships? It really doesn't. And then is a warm relationship between a therapist and the client required? So a warm relationship is not required because Ellis thought that being too warm might cause you to be dependent on that therapist, right? Because you're like, oh, this person's so kind, and so accepting and loving. Maybe I should ask them questions on how to deal with my life because I really like them. Instead, we want to make sure that the client can depend on themselves and make the healthy decisions on their own when they're not in therapy with you. All right, application. Therapeutic techniques and procedures, the practice of rational emotive behavior therapy. It is multimodal. That means that it uses all these things or a combination of cognitive, imagery, emotive, behavioral, and interpersonal. Remember, interpersonal means communication with another person, okay? And then it's integrative. Integrative means combining it together. All right, cognitive methods demonstrate to clients in a quick and direct manner what it is that they are continuing to tell themselves. Teach clients how to deal with these self-statements and stop believing in them. So remember how we said, let's say that you were raised to think that you were dumb, right? So we're going to learn how to stop saying that to ourselves. Every time it's like an automatic thought, you're like, oh, I can't do that. I'm too dumb, right? So we need to stop believing those things. Encourage them to acquire philosophy based on reality. So what we might say is, hey, did you graduate from high school? And and then you say, let's say, or the client says yes. You're like, do you think dumb people graduate from high school? Or let's say college? Would a dumb person go to college? So we're going to figure out ways to let them fight against those self-statements that they were thinking about before. Encourage them to acquire philosophy based on reality of thinking, disputing, debating. Remember those D's that we were talking about before? Challenging, interpreting, explaining, and teaching. So you might do a combination of that as a therapist so that your client can start to, dispute these ideas that they're thinking in their heads. All right, when it comes to doing cognitive homework, there is a form on the next slide that you can use, or you can at least review so you can see sort of what it looks like. This is just one of many. I just found this on the internet, and you can find other forms if you want to as well. I just wanted this one because it really does explain a little bit of everything when it comes to all the sections that you might ask your client to fill out. Make a list of their problems. Look for the absolute beliefs. Absolute beliefs, again, are potentially those irrational thoughts, right? Like, I must do this, or I'm a terrible failure, or whatever. And then you're going to dispute those beliefs. Again, right? We're going to fight against those irrational thoughts that we have internalized in ourselves so that we can live a healthier life. Carrying out homework by putting themselves in risky situations or taking situations to a risk-taking situations to challenge their self-limiting beliefs. So you might also now want them to start challenging themselves in their real world at the same time, right? So they're going to take some risks, hopefully in a safe situation, so that they realize, oh yeah, I have been thinking about this or seeing this or thinking about myself in a negative way when I don't really need to. So here's the REBT self-help form that we talked about in the previous slide. So please take a moment to look at that when you have time. All right, here are some activities that people might do. So let's say that an actor is shy. So you might have them take a small part in a play. And then let's say that they say, if I look foolish, it proves I'm a fool, right? If I'm not liked, that would be awful. I would fail and there will be failure, right? So that's what they might automatically think. So let's talk about how we can dispute those things. So they might say something like, even if I do behave foolishly at times, does not make me a foolish person all the time. I can act. I will do the best that I can. It's nice to be liked, but not everybody has to like me. And if they don't, that isn't the end of the world. If I fail, I am human and not a failure. So again, right there, right? Again, we are imperfect beings. So we will make mistakes. Even the best, the smartest of us will make mistakes, and that's okay, right? Again, if you do make a mistake, just try to correct it as much as possible and then move along. What did you learn from that experience? So we're going to dispute our irrational beliefs. We can also do bibliotherapy, which is, again, using books or literature, short stories, poems, maybe movies and stuff like that as well. It could be related to that, although bibliotherapy really does mean library, right? Changing one's language, preferences. So we might want to change it from "it would be absolutely awful if," blah, 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 to "it would be inconvenient if," right? So instead of saying "it would be absolutely awful if I fail this exam," you might say something, "oh, it would be inconvenient because now I have to work a little bit harder on the next quiz to bring up my grade." Or I might have to, like, let's say, retake this class again or something like that, right? But it isn't like the most awful thing in the world. You're not going to die. It'll be okay if you need to repeat a class. Right, psychoeducational methods, explaining how psychotherapy works. So you might have to teach your client about what is going on here. What is the plan that we're doing? All right, so we're going to end this section off right now. Bye-bye.